There shouldn't be one Elon Musk. There should be so many people doing difficult, meaningful, world changing work that none of us even recognize his name. When a society treats excellence like an outlier, that's not because excellence is rare. It's because the system isn't designed to allow excellence. And fear is the mechanism that keeps it that way. I've spent over half my life working with kids starting at age 3. And here's something to think about. Young kids, especially young kids, are not broken. They're incredibly smart and they can adapt. They're curious, they're imaginative, they notice everything. They get excited over a butterfly, a new idea or word, a tiny change that most adults don't even see anymore. What kids have is raw potential, and imagination, wonder, and the energy to explore the ideas. And then they enter the system. And year after year, I watch that curiosity get flattened, that imagination get restrained, that energy get labeled as a problem, until a child who was once alive to the world learns how to be calm, normal, and manageable. That is not growth. That's not progress. That is containment. And the reason behind this phenomena isn't intelligence. It's not talent. It's fear. Fear is the organizing principle of all our modern day institutions. Fear of complaints, fear of lawsuits, fear of backlash, fear of being wrong. So instead of teaching how belief shape behavior, how identity produces discipline, how responsibility builds strength, we teach coping, accommodation, emotional management. The institutions just want to get past a specific issue, not because any of the system actually works, but because it's safe. Now, I'm a martial arts instructor. I teach people how to fight. And when someone gets punched in the face, there's no room for theory. The truth shows up immediately. You can't cope your way out of a punch to the face. You either change how you think or you keep getting hit. That's why institutions don't teach what I teach, because at some point, someone has to be accountable. Someone's going to be uncomfortable. Someone's going to have to be responsible for what just happened. Fear isn't just something you feel. Fear is the current system taught in institutions today that decides how much human potential we're willing to allow. That's why we don't have thousands of Elon Musk type creators, inventors, and engineers. Once you understand the system, the next question is simple. How does fear actually enforce the system? Not emotionally, not theoretically, but practically. Fear works upstream, long before it ever makes it to our children. It shows up where decisions are made, in boardrooms, in policy meetings, in administrative offices. Because fear doesn't need to convince kids to stop trying. It just needs adults to stop requiring anything difficult. Here's how it works. Fear reframes responsibility and accountability as a risk. Not a risk to the child, a risk to the institution. They say things like, what happens if a parent complains? What happens if someone feels uncomfortable? Or what happens if we get sued? What happens if the optics with this are bad? When those are the questions, standards get lowered. Expectations are no longer focused on excellence. Accountability can't even exist. Not because anyone thinks that's a good system, but because it's safer. And once fear sets the incentives of our institution, especially our schools, everything and everyone downstream falls in line. Teachers are told what they can't require. Coaches are told what they should avoid. Parents are told what's considered too much. Discomfort becomes harm. Correction becomes judgment. Excellence becomes something seen as not fair or not equal. And nobody votes on this. It just becomes the air that everyone breathes. I see this clearly, but I see it clearly because I teach fighting. When a student gets punched in the face, the problem is never actually the punch. The punch just reveals something that was already missing. Clarity, belief, discipline, focus, responsibility. If I remove the discomfort, the student doesn't get stronger. They don't improve at all. They stay exactly the same and get hit exactly the same way again and again. Institutions won't allow that moment of discomfort because allowing discomfort means risking outcomes that they can't control. And fear cannot tolerate loss of control. So instead of forming people, the system just manages behavior. That's how fear enforces the system. Once you see how the system works, the next question is unavoidable. Who keeps this failing system in place? Because this doesn't survive because it's true, it survives because it's protected. So first, institutions enforce it. Schools, university, organizations, any structure whose highest priority is avoiding risk will always suppress excellence. Not because teachers don't care. Teachers are not really the problem. Institutions answer upward, not inward. That's the problem. Standards are rewritten, consequences are softened or eliminated, expectations are behavior related and not excellence related. And the institution stays stable while the potential of the entire next generation quietly dies inside of it. Second, the people in charge enforce it. Administrators who have never worked with kids or it's been years since they've been in a classroom. Boards also not been in a classroom. Policymakers, another group that's in charge, and credentialing bodies. The outcomes of the kids are not accidents. They're choices made by cowards that would rather play it safe than make a real difference. They are controlled by fear. Fear of lawsuits, fear of backlash, fear of bad press, fear of being held responsible. So excellence is treated as dangerous. Discomfort is thought of as unethical, and accountability is considered abuse. That's ideology. That's politics. And that's the incentive structure working exactly as it was designed. And if you pay attention to what's happening in the world right now, the entitlement, the lack of ambition, that give up attitude, it kind of makes sense. It's the result of a fear-based system. But here's the part that's hardest to hear. This system doesn't exist without permission. Parents allow it. Leaders enable it. Professionals who know better stay quiet because pushing back is uncomfortable or scary. And every time discomfort is avoided, fear wins another inch of battle space, of ground. No one person caused this, though. But millions of people tolerate it because stability and safety feels easier than responsibility. That's how fear enforces compliance, not with force, with silence. Once you see this, there's no going back to pretending it's accidental. You don't get to say, I didn't know. And you don't get to outsource responsibility to a system you already understand is broken by design. Fear only works at scale because individuals keep choosing comfort in small moments. It doesn't have to be dramatic or heroic moments. It's just regular moments. When it's easier to stay quiet than to take a stand. When it's easier to accommodate rather than correct. And when it's easier to lower the standard than it is to hold the line, that's where the system actually lives. It's not in policies, not in mission statements. It's in daily permission. The people who change outcomes aren't the loud ones. They're the ones who refuse to lie to make things easier. They don't pretend discomfort is harm. They don't confuse accountability with cruelty. They don't trade long-term formation for short-term peace. That's where fear starts losing ground. Not when institutions reform, but when individuals stop cooperating with a system that rewards mediocrity and holds back excellence. You don't need permission to do that. And if you did, I hereby give you permission. You just need clarity and the willingness to get comfortable being uncomfortable and take a stand instead of perpetuating the current failed system. Because every time someone refuses to lower the standard, the system weakens just a little bit. And every time someone chooses courage over comfort, fear loses its hold. Fear can only organize a world when people keep letting it make all of the decisions. Once you see that, the responsibility is yours. And that is why there aren't hundreds of thousands of Elon Musk.